Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak of my topic. Uh, I hope it's okay with my tone of voice. It's going to be a bit difficult for me to speak louder than this. Now, as you will see, the title of my presentation is different from the title of presentation which is actually documented in the catalog. The reason being, I am discussing. The title is basically a paraphrase of the original title which was published in the conference proceeding and journal. So I want to actually follow my discussion based on the actual paper. The title of the actual paper was Tackling Obesity by Diet Quality, Technology and Social Networks. Now, the objective of this talk is going to follow, starting with an introduction, followed by literature review, research gap. The research gap is going to be looking at the matter from a holistic perspective, followed by the solution which is proposed, which is a model, but the model is not really quite ready for an empirical assessment, even though viable for empirical assessment, and then conclusion, and then theoretical and practical implications. Now, from the perspective of introduction, when I looked at obesity, and this is thanks to Dr. Talal, who was my mentor and is my mentor in the area of research for obesity, my initial research started from assessing obesity within a constricted scope that was looking at adolescents. And when I had to work into getting this paper published, I realized that looking at literature only at adolescents was not really making sense to me, because if I do a comparison between papers, whether literature review papers or empirical papers of different research methodologies, they were not different, but quite similar, whether you would assess adolescents, or you would assess adults, or you would even assess infants. So I had to look at this research being holistic. I had to look at from all categories of ages of people versus normal versus obese. Now, if you look at obesity, where it matters most and where it becomes a real matter and why it becomes a global epidemic is, while if you would look at obesity from the 50s and 40s and 30s, obesity was more, seen in adults. But because of the repercussions of obesity that are leading you to type 2 diabetes, heart attacks, and sugar patients, and the sugar is something that is seen even in adolescents upon birth. So this has made obesity research in children quite a matter of highest priority of discussion. So obesity in children, the fact that it's leading children to diabetes, to heart attack, is becoming a serious issue. And if you would compare, and you would rank the countries that are suffering with obesity, Middle East is not, anywhere low. As a matter of fact, is competing right at high. So this is another issue which has to be looked at from a local perspective, tackled from a local perspective, before we personally start looking at it from a global perspective. So research has assessed obesity from various perspectives. So when I did my literature review, I understood that obesity was being tackled, first of all, from the social and environment perspective, where cities and the layout of the cities were looked at, as well as the socio-economic factors of these cities and civilizations were looked at. Like, for example, in the GCC, upon the discovery of oil, the social structure, the economic structure, the way it changed, the rapidness that was reflected through the change was one of the major factors because of which this obesity became an epidemic in this part of the world. While at the same time, the social structure that got exposed to not only good quality food, but bad quality food, and I need to say this out of my social responsibility, the fact that, parents are indulging in taking their kids to places like McDonald's and Burger King and Papa John, etc., etc. This is actually horrific, because if you look at the other part of the world, which is much more matured in their understanding of tackling obesity, the upscale neighborhoods will not have franchise restaurants. However, neighborhoods which are like, for example, the hoods, or neighborhoods which are having people that are making low income salaries, are going to be the ones that are going to have such fast food restaurants. So it's sad to see things other way around in certain parts of the world, actually. Then I also realized that when I did my literature review, there were the technological aspects. However, technology was looked at, empirically assessed, and conclusions were that there were advantages and disadvantages of using technology. And I want to give an example of this. If, for example, people are so used to using their cell phones like computers, this is something which is making life positive, but at the same time very negative. Because if you get a beep and you get a WhatsApp message and you're right in bed about to sleep, and you just unlock your cell phone, and your eyes for even 3 seconds are looking at that screen, at the glare on the screen, right then and there you destroy your sleep within those 3 seconds. Nobody just looks at a message for 3 seconds and switches off. So there are humongous disadvantages of technology, while there are advantages of technologies. However, as I will go later into this research and my findings, I'll tell you that the use of cell phones or mobile commerce or m-commerce per se is really infant and less than infant when it comes to all of the plethora of apps that are out there that are actually helping you tackle obesity. This is the perspective where my research was very much interested in looking at technology from a knowledge management tools perspective, so I'll discuss that further. Then there is the social network perspective, and this is thanks to Dr. Talal again and Ms. Noor, who actually took me into this area of research and exposed me to how obesity can be contagious, and how in social networks obesity is actually tackled to understand how it is a contagion, and how, for example, obesity tends to be contagious from an obese to a normal versus from a normal to an obese, and how this can be turned around. And from that research, I even understood new forms of methodologies being applied, in addition to just quantitative or qualitative, like, for example, simulation is what I'm trying to say over here, or refer to over here. Then, no matter which form of research method your literature or your research that you would read is following, all of the literature is looking at body mass index, BMI, as an indicator for assessing obesity, which is a major research gap, while there are other indicators that are not assessed, including that this is the only indicator that is used by technology, while other indicators, even though whether they require or they don't require other facilitating technologies, are just being ignored. Even though this matter seems so simple, yet this matter is of high concern when you will look at how research gap is being portrayed. And food consumption, it goes without say that food consumption we don't need to talk about, because everybody understands that it's the amount of calories you intake minus the amount of calories you give out, and therefore. But the issue over here is that new research has realized that the kind of diets that are out there are being adopted 80% by females, not males. Those diets are actually pertinent to females, but not to males. If males begin to apply those diets, then they're going to have deficiencies in the kind of male hormones, which are different from the hormones that are required by female per se. I'm just going to say this in a nutshell because of limitation in time. So the kind of diets males need to have are different as per, and this is not me saying or my opinion saying, this is as per verification of research that states the diets for male have to be customized, keeping in mind their imbalances, their hormones, their differences in vitamins. Being human beings, they're different still from females per se. So kind of food quality, the impact of food quality on the quality of life of male versus female, this again is another research gap. Now, what I'm trying to express over here is I identified, look at research from a holistical perspective, especially to take in consideration that one of the 2030 visions of GCC is to tackle obesity. And to be able to look into anything in the future, let's say, for example, for research grants, you will have to look at this matter from a holistical perspective. So if you will look at, for example, research gap from a technological perspective, I just gave you an example earlier of where smartphones are actually insufficient. However, what I did not mention earlier is, even if you will look at all of those knowledge management tools, per se, apps on the smartphones, they are supposed to follow the 13 evidence-based indicators or standards. However, the entire plethora set of apps that are today available to us on our cell phones for tackling obesity or controlling diet are only following 3, maximum 5 of these 13 indicators. This is right then and there showing that there is a huge research gap. There is a huge need of looking at research from a technological perspective, especially looking at innovatively from different research methods rather than just the usual methods that are being applied in current research. However, some form of experimental methods need also to be applied over here. So next, the quality of diet. Now here, there's scarce research that is assessing the diet quality on weight change. Why? Because while the research and while normal human beings understand that yes, of course, diet quality is going to affect weight. However, all of our rationale is cross-sectional based. Nobody yet researched, at least to my observation, research has not assessed the longitudinal effects that, for example, diet quality has on weight change, because everybody understands that if you're going to go on, let's say, a cabbage diet, you're going to see real massive changes in your weight. However, longitudinally speaking, the same weight is going to come back because your body is very smart, is going to double the weight back, and you will have twice the fat on you and than before, which means your body backfired on you. Your strategy backfired on you. So longitudinal assessment is another key aspect over here. Now, my PhD research was to assess the effect of social capital on physicians' decision making. And this perspective also led me to realize another research gap, that while research is looking at, and this is total social network analysis, and how, for example, obesity is affected and contagion on social networks, what research has yet to assess is how patients as well as physicians to tackle this issue are really assessing their resources online. To what extent are those resources online really being looked at and digested and are effective, to what extent? And I'm talking about the resources of social capital from the three perspectives or three dimensions of the social capital theory. Now, like Dr. Mahmoud was saying earlier, the matter of trust. Now, if, for example, I'm a patient, I wouldn't like to meet another patient of the same symptoms as it would be very scary. However, if I am online, I would love to meet the same patient. Just because I'm not seeing the patient, my trust is going to be enough to say, yes, I realize that this patient has the similar symptoms as me, and therefore let me start sharing knowledge. So social capital does play a role. However, again, there is a research gap that social capital has not been assessed so far. Earlier, I mentioned that all researchers, the first indicator, the way they want to measure obesity is using BMI, body mass index. However, they fail to measure, as research states, other indicators like total body fat, TBF, waist circumference versus waist to hip ratio. Now, these ones are equally important. Even if you will look at all of your diet tackling apps on your phones, they're only going on body mass index. Body mass index actually falls short. Why? Because if you're going to apply body mass index for females, yes, it's going to make sense. But applying body mass index for males, it just doesn't make sense. Look at, for example, a person from Africa. This person is a big guy. He has a lot of muscle on him. Naturally, genetically speaking, the person is equipped with ample, much more muscle than normal males from other parts of the world, per se. I could be wrong, but I'm just assuming this for now. Now, if you're going to tell him that, okay, let me look at your height, let me measure your height, and let me measure your weight, oops, you're fat. You cannot do that because his weight is high because of muscle. Muscle weighs more than fat. So that's another issue that needs to be tackled. So body mass index is not enough. So if it's not enough, and researchers know about that, and they're not looking at other indicators, that means that's a gap, and you need to understand why they're not looking at those other indicators. Now, here, scarce research assessing diet quality on weight change, where past research applied loss-based tools on food and nutrition, but what research is again failing to understand is how to look at this matter from a longitudinal assessment. What I found strange in my literature review of a number of papers was a lot of papers do a cross-sectional study. They give out a plethora of statistical analysis, and all of them just say in future research that longitudinal research is required. However, nobody really goes into the journey of doing longitudinal research, which really right now is not making sense to me, maybe because I am an infant in this research for now. Now, what I'm doing is, okay, to wrap up, this is the holistical model, and thank you very much.